They laughed at the P-47, then its 0.50 calories turned the Luftwaffe to dust. It sounds almost unbelievable, how a fighter mocked as a flying bathtub, a machine so bulky that German pilots joked it couldn't climb, turn, or fight, would soon become one of the most feared aircraft the United States ever sent into European skies. But the laughter wouldn't last long. This story begins on April 5, 1943, high above the rolling green countryside near Rouen, France, where the 56th Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Forces, flying their brand-new Republic P-47C Thunderbolts, prepared for what should have been a routine escort mission. Waiting for them, somewhere beyond the clouds, were battle-hardened veterans of Jägerschwader 26, Germany's elite Schlaggeter wing, flying the legendary Messerschmitt Bf 109G2 and the deadly Focke-Wulf FW-190A4. The Germans had heard reports of America's new fighter. They weren't impressed. They laughed at its size. They joked about its weight. They doubted it could even compete against the Luftwaffe's best. Little did they know, they were about to meet 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, each one capable of dropping a fighter from the sky in a single devastating burst. What happened next would become legendary. To understand why the Germans laughed and how the Americans proved them wrong, we must step back to where the story truly began. Farmingdale, New York, where Republic Aviation designed an aircraft unlike anything that had flown before. The P-47 Thunderbolt was an engineering behemoth, a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp radial engine, a massive turbo-supercharger system, armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, 8 Browning and /M 2.50 caliber machine guns, over 10,000 pounds fully loaded. It was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Even American pilots joked about it. They called it Jug, short for Juggernaut, or simply because it looked like a milk jug with wings. But inside the cockpit, pilots discovered something surprising. Despite its size, the P-47 had unmatched dive speed, rock-solid high-altitude performance, and devastating firepower. It was built for survival. It was built for punishment. And it was built to deliver overwhelming force. Yet, in early 1943, the Thunderbolt was still unproven in combat. The Luftwaffe had dominated European skies for years. Their aces, men like Adolf Galland, Joseph Priller, and Egon Mayer, had hundreds of victories. They viewed new American fighter groups as inexperienced, untested, and predictable. So when JG-26 intercepted their first P-47s, laughter came easy. The American units entering combat included 56th Fighter Group, Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, 4th Fighter Group, Colonel Don Blakesley, 78th Fighter Group. Many pilots were fresh from stateside training. They were eager but green. Germany expected an easy victory. But the U.S. fighter groups had something the Germans did not expect. A commander who understood exactly how to turn the P-47 into a killer, the legendary Hub Zemke. Zemke drilled his men relentlessly, focusing on the Thunderbolt's strengths: high-altitude advantage, unmatched dive performance, massive firepower, energy fighting tactics. He taught them something simple but revolutionary. Don't turn with a German fighter. Climb above him, dive on him, hit him with everything you've got. The stage was set. The laughter was about to end. April 5, 1943, 0930 hours. Altitude, 28,000 feet over northern France. 24 P-47s formed up to escort B-17s returning from a bombing run against German rail targets. The weather was clear. Visibility stretched nearly 100 miles. The Thunderbolt's massive engines roared steadily as they cruised westward, unaware that, below them, German radar stations had already identified the formation. The scramble order went out. At Wevelgem Airfield, pilots of JG-26 sprinted toward their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Cordes laughed as he climbed into his Bf-109. These new American fighters, they look like flying beer barrels. His wingman joked, "They won't even see us coming." By 0950 hours, 22 German fighters were climbing fast, moving to intercept from the east. The Americans spotted them just after crossing the Seine. The radio crackled, "Bandits! 3 o'clock high. Zemke's voice came next, calm, controlled. Stay high. Don't turn. Let them come to you. The Luftwaffe pilots accelerated into a shallow dive, attempting to outclimb and outmaneuver the supposedly clumsy Thunderbolts. But the P-47s held their altitude. They waited. When the Germans reached 26,000 feet, just 2,000 feet below the American formation, Zemke gave the order, "Brake and dive." 20 P-47s rolled inverted and dropped like stones. In seconds, they reached nearly 500 miles per hour. This was the Thunderbolt's domain, the dive. No German fighter could match it. The Americans now had the energy advantage. The Luftwaffe's laughter stopped. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin spotted a lone Bf-109 trying to climb into position. He pushed the nose down and unleashed a half-second burst. 8.50 caliber spat fire. A wall of tracers, nearly 100 rounds per second, tore through the German fighter's fuselage, ripping off the tail. The aircraft disintegrated in midair. Mahurin's wingman shouted, "He's gone. Jesus. He just vanished." This was the moment German pilots realized the truth. The P-47 wasn't a joke. It was a monster, but the fight was far from over. 2 FW-190s dove straight toward the bombers, attempting to break through the escort screen. Second Lieutenant Frank Euler rolled into position, firing from 300 yards. His tracers stitched across the lead German fighter. The FW-190 erupted in flames and spiraled downward. Now the German formation was in chaos. But new threats were inbound. At 1005 hours, 10 more German fighters from JG-2 approached from the south. The Thunderbolts were suddenly outnumbered. Zemke rallied his pilots. "Hold altitude. Use your dives. Don't dogfight. Hit and run hard." The sky exploded into a series of vertical spirals, high-speed dives, and violent breakaways. The P-47s dove, fired, climbed, and dove again. The Germans tried to turn with them, but with every attempt, they lost altitude, lost energy, and lost positioning. The Thunderbolts attacked with terrifying momentum. By 1015 hours, the Germans were frustrated. Their head-on attack hadn't worked. Their turning tactics had failed. Their climb advantage was gone. But they still had numbers and experience. 7 FW-190s regrouped for a final assault. They dove in tight formation toward the American fighters. The air filled with cannon shells and machine gun bursts. One P-47, flown by Lieutenant James Fife, took a direct hit to the engine cowling. Oil sprayed across the canopy. His aircraft shuddered violently. He shouted, "I'm hit. Engine's gone. I'm bailing." But his wingman, Lieutenant Bob Johnson, saw something else. The FW-190s were overextending. Their dive angle was too steep. Their formation was stretched thin. He keyed his radio. "Zemke, we've got them. They're in the open." Zemke's reply was immediate. "All jugs, dive and fire." The next 90 seconds would become some of the most chaotic air combat of the early European air war. Johnson dove at full throttle. The airframe groaned under the pressure. One wrong move and the wings could shear off. But he held steady. He lined up behind a pair of FW-190s. They never saw him coming. He squeezed the trigger. The 8 Brownings roared. A deafening, continuous, metallic thunder. A hurricane of .50 caliber fire tore through both German fighters. One exploded instantly. The second spiraled downward, pieces flying off into the slipstream. But Johnson wasn't safe. A Bf-109 latched onto his tail. Cannon shells ripped past his canopy. His plane vibrated as explosions rocked the fuselage. He couldn't dive, he was already near terminal speed. He couldn't climb, he had lost too much energy. He couldn't turn, he'd be outmaneuvered instantly. He was trapped. Zemke saw it from above. "Johnson, brake left, hard." Johnson yanked the stick. The P-47 groaned but responded. The G-forces nearly blacked him out. The German stayed glued to his tail. Another burst. More hits. Smoke filled the cockpit. Johnson shouted, "I'm not gonna make it. I'm hit. Controls are sluggish. Below him, the Earth rushed closer. His airspeed climbed past 520 miles per hour, dangerously close to the Thunderbolt's structural limit. Then a miracle. At this insane speed, the P-47 suddenly outpaced the Bf-109. The German pilot, unable to match the dive, pulled away to avoid tearing his wings off. Johnson's aircraft leveled out at just 1,000 feet above the ground. He was alone. Bleeding altitude, bleeding power, bleeding hope. Up above, the rest of the 56th Fighter Group was losing cohesion. 3 more P-47s had taken heavy damage. 1 had disappeared into the clouds, never to return. The Germans were still pushing the attack. At 1,018 hours, Zemke's formation was scattered across nearly 20 miles of sky. The Luftwaffe smelled blood. FW-190s dove repeatedly, each time forcing the Thunderbolts lower. The Americans were in danger of losing their altitude advantage. Without it, the P-47 would become vulnerable to turning attacks. Zemke realized the danger. All jugs, regain altitude, do not get dragged down. But it was too late. Several P-47s were already below 10,000 feet. Prime hunting territory for the FW-190A4, optimized for low-altitude combat. The crisis was real. The American formation could collapse at any moment. To make things worse, German anti-aircraft guns near Rouen began firing. Explosions filled the air. To make things worse, German anti-aircraft guns near Rouen began firing. Explosions filled the AIR.LT. Euler's plane was hit. He bailed out moments before his Thunderbolt exploded. The surviving pilots tried to regroup, but radio interference and chaotic maneuvering made it nearly impossible. Zemke made a desperate call. All units, rally north of the Seine. We must regroup or we're finished. But many pilots couldn't break free. They were locked in personal dogfights, each fighting for survival. Lt. Gerald Johnson engaged in a turning fight he knew he couldn't win. His P-47 shook violently as it tried to follow the FW-190's tight arc. He muttered to himself, "Come on, Jug. Just hold together." The German fired. Shells ripped through Johnson's right wing. He was out of options. Then came the call that changed everything. "Red Leader, this is Zemke. The Germans are low on fuel. Stand by to strike." Johnson's eyes widened. The tide was turning. Up at 22,000 feet. Zemke had noticed something crucial. The Germans had been fighting at full power for nearly 25 minutes. Their fuel reserves were nearly empty. Worse, they were now deep over occupied France, far from their home airfields. The Thunderbolts, however, still had fuel, and still held the high-altitude advantage. Zemke saw the moment, and he seized it. "All jugs, climb to me. We hit them from above. This is it now." The P-47s that could still climb began rising through the sunlight. Slowly at first, then faster as their turbo-superchargers kicked in. Below, the Germans continued chasing stragglers, unaware of the trap forming above them. Zemke led the attack. 20 Thunderbolts rolled inverted and dove as one. The sky filled with the metallic howling of radial engines at maximum power. The Germans never saw them. Zemke fired first. A perfect high-side attack on an FW-190. The German fighter erupted in a fireball. Behind him, 10 more P-47s opened up. The sound was indescribable, a deafening, rolling storm of .50 caliber thunder. German fighters scattered. Some slammed into steep dives. Others broke formation entirely. A few simply exploded under the overwhelming weight of American fire. Lieutenant Gerald Johnson, moments from death earlier, found himself behind a fleeing Bf-109. He fired a 3-second burst. Over 300 rounds tore into the German fighter. Pieces of metal rained downward. The canopy flew off. The pilot bailed out. Johnson shouted, "Splash one! That's for Euler!" The 56th Fighter Group was no longer desperate. They were dominant. One final scene sealed the battle. Captain Bob Johnson, still flying his heavily damaged Thunderbolt, found himself unexpectedly behind an 190 climbing for altitude. Despite his crippled aircraft, he fired. The .50 calories rattled the wings. His tracers walked up the fuselage of the German fighter. The FW-190 burst into flames. Johnson whispered to himself, "This jug's still in the fight." It was an incredible moment, a wounded thunderbolt bringing down one of the Luftwaffe's best fighters. By 10:35 hours, the Germans broke off and fled toward their airfields. The battle was over. The laughter was gone. Forever. When the Americans returned to base, the final toll astonished commanders. German losses: 11 fighters destroyed, 7 severely damaged, multiple pilots killed or captured. Fuel exhaustion forced several emergency landings. American losses: 2 P-47s shot down, 3 heavily damaged. Both lost pilots survived as POWs. For a brand new fighter on its first major combat outing, the results were stunning. In the days that followed, German intelligence officers interviewed surviving pilots. Their verdict was clear. "We underestimated the Thunderbolt. It dives like a demon, and its firepower is overwhelming." From that moment onward, Luftwaffe pilots feared the P-47's distinctive profile, its massive engine, its broad wings, and the 8.50 caliber guns that shredded anything in their path. The P-47 went on to destroy more than 3,752 enemy aircraft, becoming the deadliest American fighter of World War II in air-to-air combat. Pilots like Mahurin, Johnson, and Zemke became legends, earning Silver Stars, Distinguished Flying Crosses, and global recognition. The Germans never laughed again. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the flying bathtub, the jug, the joke, had become one of the most feared machines of the sky. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Files as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.